Have you ever wondered why a man suddenly becomes nervous when you walk into a room, even though he seems completely indifferent toward you? Picture this scenario. A co-worker who barely noticed you for months suddenly starts bringing you coffee every morning, claiming he bought too much anyway, yet his hands shake slightly as he hands you the cup. And what would Sigmund Freud say about this? The unconscious never lies, even when the conscious mind desperately tries to hide the truth. Over a century ago, Freud discovered that our deepest feelings manifest through cracks in our conscious behavior, like steam escaping through the smallest openings. Repressed emotions force their way to the surface through gestures, words, and actions that the man in love himself cannot understand. These 6 psychoanalytic signs expose any man who is secretly in love but hasn't even admitted it to himself yet. You'll be amazed at how precisely the human unconscious operates. The first warning sign appears in seemingly casual touches that suddenly become more frequent, and this is definitely no coincidence. Visualize this scene. You're standing in a group discussing some trivial topic, when suddenly he touches your arm to emphasize a point. Later, while passing by you, his hand briefly grazes your shoulder. At the end of the evening, he helps you with your coat, and his fingers linger a second longer than necessary on your back. Each individual touch seems casual, almost apologetic. Freud would speak here of the motor discharge of unconscious tensions, where the id, our instinctive part of personality, craves physical closeness, while the superego, our moral instance, censors these impulses. The result is a compromise, the seemingly innocent, accidental touch. These touches function as neurological valves for pent-up emotional energy. The man himself interprets them as polite gestures or natural communication. His consciousness refuses to recognize the true motivation because it would be too threatening to his self-image. Perhaps he's married, perhaps he fears rejection, or perhaps being in love doesn't fit his current life concept. But the unconscious knows no social conventions. It seeks the most direct path to satisfy its yearnings. Touch is the most primitive form of human connection. Even before we learned to speak, we communicated through bodily contact. This archaic level of communication bypasses all rational control mechanisms. Pay special attention to the quality of these touches. Are they fleeting and nervous? Then his consciousness is still fighting against unconscious impulses. Do they become more natural and lingering? Then the id is gaining ground. Skin is our largest sensory organ, and simultaneously the most direct connection to our emotional center. What the mind denies, the hand confesses. Especially revealing are touches in moments of emotional intensity. Does he laugh at one of your jokes and reflexively touch your arm? Does he comfort you after bad news, and his hand remains longer on your shoulder than with others? These moments expose true feelings because they deactivate conscious control. Freud realized that the body never lies because it's directly connected to the unconscious. While the mind can invent stories and reinterpret feelings, the body follows its primitive impulses. The hands of a secretly enamored man become traitors of his true feelings. Another revealing detail is how he recoils after the touch happens. This brief moment of shock at his own boldness is pure psychoanalytic poetry. Consciousness awakens from its brief sleep and is horrified at what the unconscious has done. Even more revealing is what happens in his eyes when he believes no one is watching. Almost no one recognizes this second signal. The second sign reveals itself in his gaze, not when he's looking at you, but when he believes he's unobserved. Picture yourself at a party engaging animatedly with other guests. Out of the corner of your eye, you repeatedly feel a gaze resting on you. When you turn around, he's just checking his phone or talking to someone, but these stolen moments when his eyes cling to you are like windows directly into his unconscious. Freud called this mechanism projection, the unconscious transfer of one's own feelings and desires onto the external world. The secretly enamored man projects his longing onto you without realizing it. His gaze becomes the carrier of all his repressed emotions. What he consciously doesn't allow himself to feel lives in this intense, almost hungry look. This type of looking is completely different from the normal social gaze. It's a look that seems to consume, that fixes on details others would overlook. How you laugh, how you brush hair from your face, how your features change when you're concentrated. This gaze collects memories for later, for solitary moments when consciousness sleeps and the unconscious can dream freely. The fascinating thing about this is that he's usually not conscious of this intensity. If you ask him why he was looking at you, he'll react confused or slightly irritated. "I wasn't looking," or "I was just thinking," are typical defensive reactions. Consciousness has already censored, reinterpreted, or simply deleted these moments. Freud recognized that the gaze is one of the most direct forms of sexual and emotional energy. In psychoanalysis, we speak of the libidinal investment of the gaze. The man in love invests you with his psychic energy without you, or he, fully understanding, your person becomes the object of his unconscious fantasies and yearnings. Particularly revealing is how he looks away when you meet his gaze. This reflexive flight is a classic sign of fear of one's own vulnerability. The unconscious was caught red-handed, and the ego immediately jumps into defensive mode. The shame that flashes in that moment is more authentic than any spoken word. Also observe how his gaze changes when other men speak with you. Here projection becomes especially clear. He projects his own romantic intentions onto other men and thus becomes jealous of interactions that are completely harmless. His jealousy reveals his true feelings, even though he rationally reinterprets them as protective instinct or concern for your safety. The pupils never lie. In moments of genuine emotional touch, they dilate involuntarily. The autonomic nervous system reacts to emotional stimulation completely outside conscious control. A man can control his words, censor his gestures, and rationally justify his actions, but his pupils obey only the unconscious. Freud would say, "The gaze is the royal road to the unconscious in love. In it, desire, fear, hope, and shame combine into a complex emotional cocktail that reveals true feelings uncensored." The fourth signal reveals itself in his body language, involuntary reactions that his consciousness cannot control. Imagine you enter a room and notice how he immediately changes his posture. His shoulders straighten, his back becomes more erect, his features become more attentive, or the opposite. He becomes nervous. His hands find no place. He clears his throat more frequently, and his voice changes minimally. These physical reactions happen automatically and reveal more than 1,000 words. Freud identified the id as the instinctive, drive-based part of our personality. It reacts immediately to emotional stimuli without taking the detour through rational considerations. When a secretly enamored man sees you, the id immediately activates the sympathetic nervous system, adrenaline is released, heartbeat accelerates, muscles contract, the body prepares for a significant encounter. These physiological reactions are evolutionary remnants from a time when attraction had to lead immediately to action. Modern consciousness may censor these impulses, but the body still follows its archaic programs. The id knows no social conventions or reason. It reacts purely to emotional truth. Particularly revealing is his facial expression in unobserved moments. Do you see him smile when he sees you coming before he becomes conscious that he's smiling? This spontaneous, involuntary smile is like a direct signal from his emotional center. It usually lasts only seconds before consciousness regains control and normalizes the features again. His voice is another betrayer. Does it become deeper when he speaks with you? That's an unconscious strategy to increase his attractiveness, or does it become higher and more nervous? Then his system is struggling with emotional overload. Freud would say the voice is the most direct expression of our emotional condition because it's so difficult to control. Observe his hand movements. Men in love tend to characteristic restlessness of the hands. They unconsciously seek touch opportunities, run their hands through their hair, touch their face, play with objects. This motor restlessness is sublimated sexual energy. The id wants to act, touch, move, but the superego blocks these impulses. His territorial behavior is also enlightening. Does he unconsciously position himself between you and other men? Does he lean closer when you talk? These spatial movements are primitive possession claims deeply rooted in the reptilian brain. Consciousness may take these impulses for courtesy or attention, but the unconscious follows millennia-old patterns of courtship. Freud recognized that the body speaks the most honest language we possess. It cannot lie because it's directly connected to the emotional center. While words can be calculated and gestures can be rehearsed, body language follows the authentic impulses of the id. The fascinating thing is, the more he tries to control these physical reactions, the more obvious they often become. The conscious effort to seem normal creates a characteristic stiffness that paradoxically makes his true feelings even more evident. The fifth signal hides in the elaborate excuses his unconscious invents to justify his proximity. Picture this. He always appears when you take a break, because he also needs a break. He goes the same way home as you, although it's not his shortest route, but he has to go in that direction anyway. He invites you to events that perfectly match your interests. Although he seems to know these interests only recently, these coincidences accumulate in a way that would be statistically impossible. Freud called such mechanisms rationalization, the unconscious invention of logical-sounding explanations for emotionally motivated actions. The ego cannot admit it's seeking you, so it invents plausible alternative reasons. These rationalizations are so convincing that he believes them himself. This is the difference between conscious lying and unconscious defense. His excuses become more creative over time. At first they're simple coincidences. Later complex narratives develop. He has to take care of something near you, just thought of you when he saw this or that, or has wanted for a long time to do exactly what you're doing. The unconscious is a masterful storyteller when it comes to disguising embarrassing truths. Particularly revealing is the emotional intensity with which he presents these explanations. A man who is really there by chance would mention the encounter casually. A man whose unconscious has constructed a story will tell this story with remarkable detail and slight defensiveness. He's not just convincing you, but mainly himself. Freud recognized that these defense mechanisms serve an important psychic function. They protect the ego from fear of rejection and loss of control over one's own emotions. At the same time, they allow him to follow his feelings without admitting to himself that he's doing it. It's an elegant compromise between id and superego. Notice how he reacts when you question his explanations. Does he become nervous or irritated? That's a sign you're getting too close to the unconscious truth. The psychic energy flowing into maintaining the rationalization becomes visible as soon as it's threatened. His coincidences often follow emotional patterns. After an intense conversation, he appears more frequently near you. After periods of distance, more necessary encounters are invented. The unconscious regulates proximity through these seemingly casual contacts, depending on the current state of emotional tension. The insidious thing about these defense mechanisms is their self-reinforcement. The more he repeats his rational explanations, the more he believes them himself. The boundary between unconscious motivation and conscious conviction disappears completely. Freud called this the power of repetition. Repeatedly told stories become felt truths. The sixth and most powerful signal appears in his compulsive repetition of the same behavioral patterns even when they bring him no success. Visualize this. For months, he executes the same ritual actions. Every morning, the same coffee for you. Every Friday, the same helpful question about your weekend plans. Every month, the same casual suggestion for joint activities. Even when you politely but clearly reject these advances, he starts all over again, a few weeks later with the same hope, the same unconscious expectation. Freud identified this phenomenon as repetition compulsion, the unconscious tendency to repeatedly reproduce traumatic or unresolved emotional situations. The secretly enamored man is trapped in a loop of hope, approach, subtle rejection, and renewed hope. His unconscious believes that repetition will eventually lead to a different result. This compulsion is particularly insidious because it operates outside conscious will. He doesn't rationally decide to repeat the same behavior. It happens automatically like a psychological reflex. The id knows only one goal: satisfaction of its desires. That this strategy has already failed 100 times isn't registered. The unconscious lives in an eternal present without learning curve. The tragic thing about this is that with each repetition the pattern strengthens. The invested emotional energy makes it harder to let go. Freud spoke of libidinal investment. The more psychic energy flows into an object of desire, the more important it becomes for the unconscious. Repetition becomes an addiction. His attempts to break the pattern usually fail after a short time. Perhaps he keeps distance for a week, is just friendly for a while, or tries to direct his attention to other people. But the unconscious is patient and persistent. As soon as conscious control diminishes, the old behavioral patterns return, often more intense than before. The paradoxical thing is that precisely the predictability of his patterns makes them so revealing. A man who truly gets over you changes his behavior. A man in repetition compulsion will always send the same signals with mechanical regularity. These 6 signals reveal all the power of the unconscious in love and show why Freud was right. The heart knows reasons that the mind doesn't understand. Freud was right. The unconscious never lies. While the conscious mind develops strategies, wears masks, and invents stories, the unconscious follows its own brutal honesty. It communicates through gestures, looks, actions, and repetitions, a language older than all words. Recognizing these signs doesn't mean exploiting them. It means understanding the complexity of the human soul and responding with compassion, because you too carry an unconscious that guards its own secrets. What city are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. If this content opened your mind in some way, like the video and subscribe to the channel.